Robert Chen had built his fortune from nothing. Starting with a small computer repair shop in his garage 20 years ago, he had grown his tech company into a billion-dollar empire. At 58 years old, he owned 3 mansions, a private jet, and more cars than he could count. Money had never been a problem for Robert. But now, for the first time in his life, all his wealth couldn't buy him the one thing he desperately needed. His health was failing, and no one could figure out why. It started slowly, so slowly that Robert barely noticed at first. He would forget where he put his car keys. Sometimes he would walk into a room and forget why he came there. His wife Linda thought it was just stress. Running a company worth billions wasn't easy after all. Everyone has bad days, but the bad days started coming more often. During important board meetings, Robert would lose his train of thought mid-sentence. He would stare at familiar faces and struggle to remember names of people he had worked with for years. His hands would shake when he tried to sign documents. Simple tasks that used to take him minutes now took hours. Linda watched her husband with growing worry. The man who used to work 18-hour days without breaking a sweat now needed afternoon naps. The sharp mind that could solve complex business problems in seconds was now struggling with basic math. Something was very wrong. "Maybe you should see a doctor," Linda suggested one evening after Robert spent 10 minutes looking for glasses that were sitting on top of his head. Robert agreed. He wasn't the type to ignore problems, especially when they affected his work. The next week he visited Dr. Patterson, the family doctor who had been taking care of the Chen family for over a decade. Dr. Patterson ran the usual tests. Blood work, blood pressure, reflexes. Everything came back normal. "You're probably just tired," the doctor said. "Take a vacation. Reduce your stress," but the symptoms got worse. Robert started having trouble with balance. He would bump into walls or trip over nothing. His speech became slurred sometimes, especially in the evenings. His memory problems weren't just about small things anymore. He forgot important business meetings. He couldn't remember conversations he had the day before. Linda insisted they see a specialist. Dr. Williams was one of the best neurologists in the city. His waiting list was usually 6 months long, but money opened doors quickly for the Chen family. Within a week, Robert was sitting in Dr. Williams' office undergoing a battery of tests. The MRI showed nothing unusual. The CT scan was clear. Blood tests for various neurological conditions came back negative. Dr. Williams scratched his head. "Let's try some more specialized tests," he said. Robert underwent every test imaginable. They checked for Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, and dozens of other conditions. They tested his cerebrospinal fluid. They did genetic testing. They even checked for rare tropical diseases. Thinking maybe Robert had picked up something during his business travels, all the tests came back normal or inconclusive. Dr. Williams referred Robert to Dr. Thompson at the prestigious medical center downtown. Dr. Thompson was known for solving medical mysteries that stumped other doctors. He had written textbooks and appeared on medical TV shows. If anyone could figure out what was wrong with Robert, it would be him. Dr. Thompson ordered even more tests. He brought in colleagues to examine Robert. They tested for heavy metal poisoning, vitamin deficiencies, autoimmune disorders, and brain tumors. They looked for signs of stroke or mini-strokes. They checked for sleep disorders and psychiatric conditions. Still nothing. "This is very unusual," Dr. Thompson admitted to Linda during one of their appointments. "Your husband's symptoms are real, but we can't find a medical explanation. Sometimes these things take time to diagnose, but Robert didn't have time. His condition was getting worse by the week. He had to step back from running his company, leaving the daily operations to his trusted managers. The man who once gave confident presentations to thousands of people now struggled to order food at restaurants. Linda wasn't giving up. She used Robert's money and connections to reach the best doctors in the world. They flew to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, where teams of specialists examined Robert for a full week. The doctors there ran tests that weren't available anywhere else. They used the most advanced brain imaging technology. They consulted with experts from around the globe. The result was the same. No answers. Next, they tried Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. The doctors there were known for handling the most complex cases. They admitted Robert for 2 weeks of intensive testing. Neurologists, psychiatrists, internists, and researchers all took turns examining him. They tested theories that seemed impossible. They looked for diseases so rare that only a handful of people in the world had ever been diagnosed with them. Still, nothing made sense. The Chen family's medical bills were approaching $2 million. But money wasn't the issue. Robert's health was declining rapidly. He needed help walking. His speech was becoming harder to understand. Some days he didn't recognize close friends or family members. Linda contacted the best private medical facility in Switzerland. The doctors there claimed they could solve any medical mystery, given enough time and resources. Robert was weak, but they made the trip. For 3 weeks, Swiss doctors put Robert through every test known to modern medicine. They brought in specialists from Germany, France, and England. They used experimental equipment that wasn't available to the general public. The Swiss doctors found some interesting abnormalities in Robert's blood work, but nothing that explained his symptoms. They suggested it might be a new, undiscovered disease. They wanted to study Robert for months, maybe years, to figure out what was happening. Robert and Linda returned home frustrated and scared. 15 different doctors, the smartest medical minds in the world, had examined Robert. They had spent millions of dollars and months of time. They had access to the most advanced medical technology available. And they were no closer to an answer than when they started. Meanwhile, Robert continued to get worse. The man who used to run marathons now needed help getting dressed. The brilliant businessman who could remember thousands of details now forgot the names of his own children. His hands shook so badly he couldn't write his name. His balance was so poor he needed a wheelchair to move around safely. Linda felt helpless. She had used every connection, spent every dollar, and consulted every expert she could find. Her husband was dying in front of her eyes, and the best doctors in the world couldn't tell her why. But sometimes, the answer to a complex problem isn't found in a high-tech laboratory or an expensive medical facility. Sometimes the most important clues are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right person to notice them. And sometimes that person isn't a doctor with decades of training and advanced degrees. Sometimes, it's the person who sees what everyone else overlooks. In the Chen household, that person cleaned the floors every morning, dusted the furniture every afternoon, and paid attention to details that others ignored. She had been watching Robert's decline with the careful eyes of someone who knew his daily routines better than anyone else. And she was starting to notice something that all those expensive doctors had missed. Rosa Mendoza had been working for the Chen family for 12 years. Every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, she would arrive at their mansion in Beverly Hills, put on her apron, and begin her daily routine. She was 45 years old, originally from Guatemala, and had been cleaning houses since she was 17. Rosa had raised 4 children while working 2 jobs. She knew how to spot when something was wrong with someone's health. Mothers develop that skill early, and Rosa had been taking care of people her whole life. When Robert first started showing signs of illness, Rosa noticed before anyone else did. She saw him standing in his study looking confused about where he had put important papers. She watched him struggle to remember which bathroom was which in his own house. Small things that his family might miss, but Rosa paid attention to details. As Robert's condition got worse, his family transformed their home into something that looked like a hospital. Nurses came and went. Medical equipment appeared in different rooms. Doctors visited almost daily, carrying briefcases full of test results and charts. Rosa continued her work around all the medical chaos. She cleaned around the oxygen monitors, dusted the medical books that Linda had bought, and organized the countless pill bottles that different doctors had prescribed. She watched Robert deteriorate day by day, and her heart broke for the family she had come to love. But Rosa was seeing something that all those expensive doctors weren't seeing. Rosa's workday started in Robert's study every morning. This room was Robert's favorite place in the house. He had designed it himself when they built the mansion 15 years ago. The walls were lined with books about business and technology. Awards and photographs covered every surface. In the center of the room sat Robert's pride and joy, an antique desk that he had bought at an auction 5 years earlier. Robert spent hours at that desk every day. Even after he got sick and couldn't work full-time anymore, he would sit there for hours trying to read emails or review documents. It was where he felt most comfortable, where he felt like himself. Rosa cleaned that desk every single morning. She dusted every inch of its surface, polished the wood, and organized Robert's papers. She had been doing this exact routine for 5 years, ever since Robert bought the desk. And that's when Rosa started to notice something strange. No matter how carefully she cleaned the desk the day before, there was always a thin layer of dust on it the next morning. But this wasn't ordinary dust. Rosa had been cleaning houses for almost 30 years. She knew what normal dust looked like, how it felt, how it smelled. This was different. The dust on Robert's desk had a slightly metallic smell. It was finer than regular dust, almost like powder, and it seemed to concentrate around the areas where Robert rested his arms and hands when he worked. At first, Rosa thought maybe the desk was just old and deteriorating. Antique furniture sometimes develops problems over time. But as weeks passed, she noticed that Robert's symptoms seemed to follow a pattern. He was always worse in the mornings, after spending long evenings working at his desk the night before. Rosa began paying closer attention. She noticed that on days when Robert spent more time at his desk, his hands would shake more the next day. When he worked late into the night at the desk, his speech would be more slurred the following morning. The doctors never asked Rosa about these patterns. They never asked her about Robert's daily routines, his favorite places in the house, or what she observed during her 12 years of watching him work and live. But Rosa kept watching, and the pattern became clearer. She also noticed that Robert's symptoms were worse during certain seasons. In the summer, when the air conditioning ran constantly and the house was sealed tight, Robert's condition seemed to decline faster. In the winter, when they opened windows for fresh air, he sometimes had slightly better days. Rosa didn't have a medical degree, but she had something else: common sense and careful observation. She started thinking about what could be causing this pattern. What was different about that desk? What could be making Robert sicker when he spent time there? One day, while cleaning the desk extra carefully, Rosa noticed something she had never seen before. Under the bright morning sunlight streaming through the study window, she could see tiny particles floating in the air around the desk. They were almost invisible, like specks of glitter catching the light. Rosa had seen something similar before years ago when her neighbor's house was being renovated. The contractor had warned everyone about laid paint dust that could be dangerous, especially for children. The particles looked just like what Rosa was seeing around Robert's desk. That afternoon, Rosa went to the public library and used the computer to research lead poisoning. What she read made her heart race. The symptoms described on the medical websites matched exactly what she had been watching happen to Robert: memory loss, confusion, hand tremors, balance problems, difficulty speaking. All of it matched. Rosa learned that lead poisoning could happen slowly over years if someone was exposed to small amounts regularly. It could come from old paint, contaminated dust, or antique items that were treated with lead-based materials. The more Rosa read, the more convinced she became that she had found the answer that 15 doctors had missed. But Rosa faced a big problem. She was a housekeeper. She didn't have medical training. She didn't have a college degree. How could she tell a billionaire family that she thought she knew what was wrong with Robert when the smartest doctors in the world couldn't figure it out? Rosa worried that the family would think she was overstepping her boundaries. Worse, they might think she was crazy and fire her. She needed this job to support her own family. But every day, Rosa watched Robert get sicker. She saw Linda crying when she thought no one was looking. She saw their adult children flying in from around the world, fearing their father might die without anyone knowing why. Rosa made a decision. She would gather more evidence before saying anything. She started keeping a notebook, writing down everything she observed. She noted which days Robert spent more time at his desk and how his symptoms were the next day. She paid attention to the air circulation in the study. She researched more about the desk itself. Rosa learned that Robert had bought the desk from an auction house that specialized in European antiques. The auction listing, which she found online, mentioned that the desk had been recently restored to original condition by a craftsman who used traditional techniques and materials. Traditional techniques, Rosa learned, often meant using the same materials that were used when the furniture was originally made. For antiques from the 1700s and 1800s, that often included lead-based paints and finishes. Rosa was now certain she had found the cause of Robert's illness. The question was whether she had the courage to speak up. She thought about her own children, how she would want someone to help them if they were in danger. She thought about Robert, who had always treated her with respect and kindness. She thought about Linda, who was watching her husband disappear a little more each day. Rosa decided that saving a life was more important than saving her job. She spent one more week gathering evidence. She carefully collected samples of the dust from Robert's desk in small containers. She took photographs of the particles floating in the sunlight. She documented everything she had observed about the patterns of Robert's illness. Then Rosa made an appointment to speak with Linda privately. She knew this conversation could change everything. Either she was about to save Robert's life, or she was about to make the biggest mistake of her career. But Rosa had raised 4 children and worked hard her entire life. She had learned to trust her instincts, and her instincts were telling her that she had found the answer that could save Robert Chen. Rosa's hands were shaking as she knocked on Linda's bedroom door. It was a Thursday afternoon and Robert was taking his usual nap. The house was quiet except for the soft humming of medical equipment that had become part of their daily soundtrack. "Come in," Linda called softly. Rosa found Linda sitting by the window, staring out at the garden where Robert used to walk every morning before he got sick. There were dark circles under Linda's eyes. She had lost weight from the stress and worry. The past 18 months had aged her 10 years. "Mrs. Chen," Rosa said quietly, "could I speak with you privately? It's about Mr. Chen's condition." Linda looked up, surprised. In 12 years, Rosa had never asked for a private conversation about anything personal. She was always professional, always respectful of boundaries. "Of course, Rosa, please sit down." Rosa remained standing. She was too nervous to sit. She clutched a small manila envelope containing the evidence she had collected over the past weeks. "Mrs. Chen, I know this might sound crazy, and I know I'm just the housekeeper, but I think I might know what's making Mr. Chen sick." Linda's eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" Rosa took a deep breath. This was the moment that could change everything. "I've been watching Mr. Chen every day for 5 years since he bought that antique desk. I clean his study every morning and I've noticed things that I think might be important." Linda leaned forward, her full attention now on Rosa. After months of disappointing doctor visits and failed treatments, she was willing to listen to anyone who might have answers. "What kind of things?" Linda asked. Rosa opened her envelope and pulled out her notebook. "I've been keeping track of Mr. Chen's good days and bad days. He's always worse in the mornings after he spends long evenings at his desk. And there's something strange about that desk, Mrs. Chen, something that's been bothering me for months." Rosa showed Linda the photographs she had taken of the mysterious particles floating around the desk. "No matter how well I clean that desk, there's always this fine dust on it the next morning. It's not normal dust. It smells metallic and it's always heaviest where Mr. Chen puts his hands and arms." Linda studied the photographs. She had never noticed the particles before, but looking at Rosa's pictures, she could clearly see them floating in the sunlight. "I did some research at the library," Rosa continued, her confidence growing as she saw Linda taking her seriously. "The symptoms Mr. Chen has match exactly with something called lead poisoning, and old furniture, especially antiques that have been restored, sometimes contains lead." Rosa pulled out printouts from medical websites that she had copied at the library. She had highlighted the symptoms of lead poisoning in yellow marker. The list was like a perfect description of Robert's condition: memory problems, confusion, hand tremors, balance issues, difficulty speaking, fatigue. Linda read through the information, her eyes widening. "Rosa, this makes sense. But why didn't any of the doctors think of this?" "I think because they were looking for complicated diseases," Rosa said. "They did so many fancy tests, but maybe they didn't think to test for something this simple. And they never asked me about what I see every day in this house." Linda stood up and began pacing the room. "The desk. Robert loves that desk. He bought it 5 years ago, and that's about when his symptoms started, isn't it?" Rosa nodded. "Yes, ma'am. The symptoms started slowly about 6 months after he bought the desk. And they've gotten worse as he spent more time working there." "My God," Linda whispered. "Rosa, if you're right about this, Mrs. Chen, I brought samples of the dust from the desk. Could we have them tested? Just to see if I'm right?" Linda looked at the small containers Rosa had carefully labeled and dated. This housekeeper, this woman who cleaned their toilets and folded their laundry, had done more detective work than 15 specialists with medical degrees. "Yes," Linda said firmly. "Yes, we're going to test these samples. And we're going to test Robert specifically for lead poisoning. I don't care if the doctors think it's unlikely. We're going to check. The next morning, Linda called Dr. Thompson's office. She explained that she wanted Robert tested for heavy metal poisoning, specifically lead. The nurse seemed confused. Mrs. Chen, we already ran general heavy metal tests months ago. They were negative. I want specific detailed lead testing, Linda insisted. And I have samples from our house that I want analyzed as well. Dr. Thompson agreed to order the tests, though he sounded skeptical during their phone conversation. Mrs. Chen, lead poisoning is quite rare in adults, especially in your socioeconomic bracket. But if it will give you peace of mind, we'll certainly run the tests. While they waited for the test results, Rosa continued documenting her observations. She paid even closer attention to the patterns of Robert's illness. She noticed that his symptoms were always worse on Mondays, after he had spent the weekend working on personal projects at his desk. She observed that his hands shook more after he had been writing letters or signing documents at the desk. Rosa also researched the history of Robert's antique desk. She spent hours at the library, using their internet connection to trace the desk's origins. She found the auction house where Robert had bought it and managed to contact them by phone. The auction house employee was helpful. Oh yes, I remember that desk. Beautiful piece from the 1780s. It had been in a private collection for decades, but the family had it professionally restored before the auction. What kind of restoration? Rosa asked. Full restoration? The craftsman used traditional methods to match the original finish. He was very proud of his work, said he used the same types of paints and varnishes that would have been used in the 18th century. Rosa's heart sank. Traditional 18th century paints and varnishes almost certainly contained lead. She asked for the contact information of the restoration expert. When she called him, the man was initially proud to discuss his work on the desk. It was a masterpiece when I finished with it, he said. I used authentic lead-based paints to match the original colors exactly. Most restorers today use modern materials, but I specialize in historical accuracy. Lead-based paints? Rosa asked. Oh yes, that's how they did it in the 1700s. Lead makes the colors more vibrant and durable. Of course, you have to be careful working with it. But once it's dry and sealed, it's perfectly safe. But Rosa had learned from her research that lead paint could break down over time, especially in dry environments with air circulation. The constant use of the desk, the weight of papers and books, the friction from Robert's arms resting on it day after day, could cause the lead-based finish to deteriorate into fine particles. 3 days later, Linda received a phone call that changed everything. Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Thompson. I have Robert's test results, and I need you and your husband to come in immediately. What did you find? Linda asked, though she already suspected the answer. Robert has dangerously high levels of lead in his blood. The concentrations are consistent with chronic exposure over several years. Mrs. Chen, we also tested the samples you brought from your house. That dust from the desk contains extremely high levels of lead. Linda sat down heavily in her chair. Rosa had been right. A housekeeper with no medical training had solved a mystery that had stumped the best doctors in the world. Dr. Thompson, what do we do now? We start treatment immediately. Lead poisoning is serious, but it's treatable if we catch it in time. The first step is removing Robert from the source of exposure completely. That desk needs to be handled as hazardous waste. When Linda hung up the phone, she found Rosa in the kitchen, preparing Robert's lunch. Rosa, Linda said, tears in her eyes. You were right. You saved his life. Rosa's own eyes filled with tears. Is he going to be okay? The doctor says yes if we start treatment right away. Rosa, I don't know how to thank you. You did what 15 doctors couldn't do. That afternoon, a hazardous materials team came to remove Robert's beloved antique desk. As they carefully wrapped it in protective plastic, Linda realized that this beautiful piece of furniture had nearly killed her husband. But thanks to the careful observations of a housekeeper who paid attention to details that everyone else missed, Robert's story wasn't going to end in tragedy. It was going to end with healing, recovery, and a new appreciation for the wisdom that can come from the most unexpected sources. The hazardous materials team finished removing Robert's desk by late afternoon. They wore full protective suits and respirators, treating the beautiful antique like the dangerous piece of furniture it had become. As they carried it away, Linda felt a mixture of relief and anger. relief that they had finally found the cause of Robert's illness, and anger that it had taken so long to discover something so obvious. Dr. Thompson had scheduled an emergency appointment for the next morning to begin Robert's treatment. But first, he wanted to understand exactly how the lead poisoning had gone undetected for so long. "Mrs. Chen," Dr. Thompson said during their phone call, "I have to admit this is embarrassing for our entire medical team. We ran extensive tests, but we never specifically looked for chronic lead exposure in an adult living in an affluent household. It's simply not something we typically consider." Linda understood his point, but she was frustrated. "Doctor, what I don't understand is why no one asked about Robert's daily environment. Rosa has been watching him every day for years. She saw patterns that might have helped with the diagnosis months ago." There was a pause on the phone. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Chen. In our focus on high-tech diagnostics and rare diseases, we sometimes forget to ask about the simple things. Environmental exposure questions are usually part of our standard protocol, but when we're dealing with patients of your social and economic status, we tend to assume that environmental toxins aren't a concern." This assumption had nearly cost Robert his life. The next morning, Robert and Linda arrived at Dr. Thompson's office for the first chelation therapy session. Robert was weak and needed a wheelchair, but for the first time in months there was hope in Linda's eyes. Dr. Thompson explained the treatment process. Chelation therapy uses special medications that bind to the lead in your bloodstream and help your body eliminate it through your kidneys. It's not a quick process. We'll need multiple sessions over several weeks, possibly months. But the good news is that many of the neurological symptoms you've been experiencing can improve significantly once we remove the lead from your system. Robert, who had been mostly silent during the appointment due to his speech difficulties, managed to ask an important question. How did Rosa know?" Dr. Thompson looked thoughtful. "Your housekeeper made observations that we missed because we weren't looking in the right place. She saw patterns in your daily life that we never asked about. She noticed environmental factors that our tests didn't address. Honestly, Mr. Chen, she did detective work that put our medical team to shame." As Robert began his first chelation treatment, Linda sat beside him and told him everything Rosa had discovered. She explained how Rosa had noticed the mysterious dust, tracked the patterns of his symptoms, and researched lead poisoning on her own time. Robert listened with amazement. His speech was still slurred, but his message was clear. "We need to thank her properly." Linda had already been thinking about how to show their gratitude to Rosa. A simple thank you or even a cash bonus didn't seem adequate for someone who had literally saved Robert's life. That evening, Linda sat down with Rosa in the kitchen. "Rosa, I want you to know that our family will never forget what you've done for us. You gave us back hope when we had lost all of it." Rosa was uncomfortable with the praise. She had always been modest about her contributions to the household. "Mrs. Chen, I just did what felt right. I couldn't watch Mr. Chen suffer when I thought I might know what was wrong. But Rosa, you risked your job to help us. You could have stayed silent and just continued cleaning around the medical equipment and doctors. Instead, you spoke up, even though you knew we might not believe you." Linda had spent the past few days thinking about how Rosa's intervention revealed problems that went beyond just Robert's medical case. "Rosa, I realize now that in all these years, we never really asked for your observations about our family's health and daily life. You know our routines better than anyone, but we treated you like you were invisible when it came to important matters." Rosa nodded slowly. "In my job, I see many things, but people don't usually want their housekeeper to comment on personal matters." "That was our mistake," Linda said firmly. "You have wisdom and observational skills that we should have been valuing all along." Linda had made a decision. "Rosa, I want to offer you a new position in our household. In addition to your regular duties, I'd like you to serve as our family's health and safety coordinator. You would be responsible for monitoring environmental factors in our home, keeping track of unusual patterns, and alerting us to potential health concerns." Rosa was stunned. "Mrs. Chen, I don't have any medical training. You don't need medical training for what I'm asking. You need exactly what you already have: careful observation skills, common sense, and the courage to speak up when something seems wrong. Those are skills that apparently some doctors don't have." Linda explained that the new position would come with a significant salary increase and additional responsibilities. Rosa would also receive training in basic health and safety protocols. though her natural abilities were already more valuable than any formal education. "There's something else," Linda continued. "Robert and I want to establish a scholarship fund in your name. We want to help other people from your community get education and training in healthcare fields. We've seen firsthand that wisdom and dedication are more important than fancy degrees." Rosa began to cry. In her 12 years with the Chen family, she had always been treated well, but she had never expected recognition like this. Over the following weeks, as Robert began his recovery, the family's appreciation for Rosa continued to grow. Robert's improvement was slow but steady. After 2 weeks of chelation therapy, his hand tremors were less severe. After a month, his speech was clearer. His memory was improving and his balance was getting better. Dr. Thompson was amazed by Robert's progress. "I have to say, Mrs. Chen, catching this when we did probably saved your husband from permanent neurological damage. If Rosa hadn't figured this out," Robert might have continued, "deteriorating for months or even years before we identified the cause. The medical community was also taking notice of Robert's case." Dr. Thompson presented the case at a medical conference, emphasizing how environmental factors had been overlooked and how a non-medical observer had provided the key insight. "This case taught our team an important lesson," Dr. Thompson told his colleagues. "We need to listen to everyone who interacts with our patients, not just other medical professionals. Sometimes the person who spends the most time with the patient has the most valuable information." Several medical schools began incorporating Robert's case into their curriculum as an example of the importance of environmental assessment and the value of listening to all caregivers, regardless of their formal training. But the most meaningful recognition came from Robert himself. As his health improved and his speech returned to normal, he made sure to thank Rosa personally every day. "Rosa," he said one morning as she was organizing his new, lead-free home office, "you taught me something more valuable than any business lesson I've ever learned. You showed me that intelligence and wisdom come in many forms, and that the people we sometimes overlook might be the ones with the most important insights." Rosa had not only saved Robert's life, but she had also changed how the Chen family viewed the people around them. They realized that their household staff weren't just employees providing services, but valuable team members with skills and observations that could benefit everyone. The antique desk that had nearly killed Robert was safely disposed of as hazardous waste. In its place, Robert installed a modern ergonomic workstation with built-in air purification, but more importantly, he made sure that Rosa had input on all decisions about the home environment. As Robert's recovery continued, he often reflected on how close he had come to losing everything. 15 world-class doctors with access to the most advanced medical technology had been stumped by his condition. It took a housekeeper with keen observation skills and the courage to speak up to save his life. The experience had taught the entire Chen family to listen more carefully to the people around them and to value wisdom wherever they found it, regardless of educational background or social status. 6 months after Rosa's discovery, Robert Chen was almost completely back to his old self. The chelation therapy had been successful in removing the lead from his system, and his neurological symptoms had improved dramatically. His memory was sharp again, his hands were steady, and his speech was clear. Most importantly, he had returned to running his company, though with a new perspective on what really mattered in life. The transformation was remarkable. Dr. Thompson documented Robert's recovery carefully, amazed at how completely the symptoms had reversed once the source of lead exposure was eliminated. "This is one of the most complete recoveries from chronic lead poisoning I've ever seen," he told Robert during a follow-up appointment. If Rosa hadn't identified the source when she did, the damage could have been permanent. Robert's story had become something of a legend in medical circles. Dr. Thompson had presented the case at conferences across the country, and medical journals had published articles about the importance of environmental assessment and listening to non-medical caregivers. The case was now taught in medical schools as an example of how crucial it is to consider all sources of information when diagnosing complex conditions. But for Robert, the most important outcome wasn't his medical recovery or the attention from the medical community. It was the way the experience had changed his understanding of the people around him. Rosa had not only kept her job, but her new role as the family's health and safety coordinator had proven invaluable. She had implemented simple but effective monitoring systems throughout the house. She kept track of air quality, checked for potential hazards, and maintained detailed logs of any unusual patterns in the family's health or environment. Her natural observational skills, combined with some basic training in health and safety protocols, made her incredibly effective in her new role. She had already prevented 2 potential problems: identifying a gas leak from an outdoor barbecue that could have caused carbon monoxide poisoning, and noticing that Linda was developing respiratory symptoms that turned out to be caused by mold in the guest bathroom. Rosa has become our family's early warning system, Robert often told friends. She sees things that we miss because we're too busy or distracted. She pays attention to details that could save our lives. The scholarship fund that Robert and Linda had established in Rosa's name had grown into something much larger than they originally planned. Word of Rosa's story had spread, and other families had contributed to the fund. Local news stations had picked up the story, inspiring donations from people who admired Rosa's courage and dedication. The Rosa Mendoza Healthcare Education Fund had already provided scholarships to 15 students from underserved communities who wanted to pursue careers in healthcare. The recipients studied everything from nursing to environmental health to medical technology. Each scholarship came with a personal note from Rosa, encouraging the students to trust their observations and speak up when they noticed something important. One of the scholarship recipients was Rosa's own daughter, Isabella, who had been inspired by her mother's experience to study environmental health. "My mom showed me that you don't need a fancy degree to make a difference in people's lives," Isabella said during her acceptance speech at the local community college. "But education can help you make an even bigger difference." Rosa had also become an advocate for recognizing the knowledge and skills of domestic workers. She had been invited to speak at conferences about the importance of including household staff in health and safety discussions. Her presentations were always simple and heartfelt, focusing on practical observations rather than complex theories. "I'm not a doctor," Rosa would tell audiences, "but I spend more time in these homes than anyone else. I see patterns that busy families might miss. If employers would just ask us what we notice, we might be able to help prevent problems before they become serious." Her advocacy had led to changes in how some wealthy families approached household management. Several families in the Chen social circle had begun holding regular meetings with their household staff to discuss health and safety observations. Some had even hired consultants to train their domestic workers in basic health and environmental monitoring. The ripple effects of Rosa's discovery continued to spread. Dr. Thompson had established new protocols in his practice that included detailed environmental assessments for all patients with unexplained neurological symptoms. He also made sure to interview household staff, caregivers, and family members about their observations. The Rosa Protocol, as it became known informally among Dr. Thompson's colleagues, had already led to the diagnosis of 3 other cases of environmental poisoning that might have gone undetected. One patient had been exposed to mercury from a broken thermometer collection, another had been affected by pesticide residue in an old storage room, and a third had been poisoned by fumes from improperly stored cleaning chemicals. Rosa taught us that the people who spend the most time with patients often have the most valuable information. Dr. Thompson explained to medical students during his lectures. "We need to check our assumptions about who can provide useful medical insights." The Chen family's relationship with Rosa had evolved into something much deeper than employer and employee. She had become a trusted advisor and friend. Robert and Linda included her in family decisions that affected the household, and they valued her input on everything from home renovations to health decisions. Robert's children, who had flown in from around the world during their father's illness, had also developed a new appreciation for Rosa. They had watched her save their father's life through careful observation and courage. When they visited the family home, they always made time to talk with Rosa about their own lives and seek her advice. "Rosa taught our whole family to pay attention to the people around us," Robert's daughter Amy said. "We used to think that the most important advice came from experts with impressive credentials. Now we know that wisdom can come from anyone who cares enough to observe carefully and speak honestly." The antique desk that had nearly killed Robert had been properly disposed of, but the Chen family had kept detailed records of the entire experience. They had donated these records to researchers studying environmental health hazards, hoping that other families might be protected from similar dangers. Robert had also worked with auction houses and antique dealers to raise awareness about the potential health risks of restored antiques. Many dealers now include warnings about possible lead content in their listings, and some have begun requiring lead testing for furniture that has been restored using traditional methods. A year after his recovery, Robert held a special celebration dinner to thank Rosa and to announce the expansion of the scholarship fund. The dinner was attended by Dr. Thompson, several of the scholarship recipients, and Rosa's extended family. During his speech that evening, Robert reflected on how the experience had changed his perspective on success and wisdom. "I spent my whole career believing that the most valuable insights came from people with the best education, the highest credentials, and the most expensive expertise," Robert said. "I was wrong. The most valuable insight that ever came into my life came from someone who was willing to look carefully, think clearly, and speak courageously, even when it meant risking her job." He turned to Rosa, who was sitting with her family at the head table. "Rosa, you didn't just save my life. You taught me a lesson about human value that I'll never forget. You showed me that intelligence, wisdom, and dedication are found in many places, and that the people we sometimes overlook might be the ones with the most important things to teach us." Rosa, still modest after all the recognition, smiled and nodded. "Mr. Chen, I just did what any mother would do. When you see someone suffering and you think you might know how to help, you have to try." As the evening continued, guests shared stories about times when they had learned important lessons from unexpected sources. The conversation highlighted how often society overlooks the knowledge and insights of people who don't have formal credentials, but possess valuable experience and wisdom. Dr. Thompson stood up during the dinner to make an announcement. "I want everyone to know that because of Rosa's contribution to medical knowledge, our hospital is establishing the Rosa Mendoza Award for Environmental Health Detection. This award will recognize healthcare workers, family members, and caregivers who identify environmental health hazards through careful observation." The first recipient of the award was, of course, Rosa herself. As the evening came to an end, Robert realized that his illness and recovery had taught him the most important lesson of his life. Success wasn't just about building wealth or achieving recognition in business. True success included recognizing the value in every person around him and being humble enough to learn from anyone willing to share their wisdom. Rosa had given him back his health, but more importantly, she had given him a new understanding of what it meant to truly see and value the people in his life. Her courage to speak up had saved his life, and her example had changed how his entire family approached relationships with the people around them. The mystery that had stumped 15 doctors had been solved by one observant housekeeper who cared enough to pay attention and was brave enough to speak up. In doing so, Rosa had proven that sometimes the most important answers come from the most unexpected places, and that wisdom has nothing to do with credentials and everything to do with caring, observing, and having the courage to act on what you notice.